Welcome back to the Mara News Desk, powered by Bitcoin Magazine. I'm your host, Pete Rizzo, editor of Bitcoin Magazine. The main event of Bitcoin 2024, just minutes away. Donald J. Trump's historic speech, a former president speaking at a Bitcoin conference. Right now, we have a special guest who's no stranger to politics or Bitcoin conferences, Dr. Ron Paul, former U.S. candidate for president. Dr. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Good. Nice to be here.
And you influenced a whole generation of people to think differently about money. Many of the old-time Bitcoiners that I talked to found Bitcoin through your work, your writing, from the authors you evangelized. Can you tell us what it's like to be at a Bitcoin conference today, given all that context?
Well, you know, I think it's fantastic. And in a way, I didn't seek out 10 years ago, well, I'm going to promote the Bitcoin deal. But I did have a precise goal, and that was to excite people about freedom and to alert them to the dangers that we live in. And that's why I ended up in Congress, only because I spoke out, because I had no real desire just to go to Congress. But the thing of it is, by alerting people to what happened, but one of the things I did get on banking committee, I was fascinated with monetary policy, was highly influenced with August 15th, 1971, when they, severed the dollar, and I was convinced that there'd be a lot of inflation then. So that was that was the one thing that impressed me, and so I got on the banking committee right away to talk about monetary policy, and things have evolved very much like I've anticipated. But I'm still giving pretty much the same speech that a lot of young people came to. I just love going to the college campuses, and I became influenced by them. They claim I was influenced others, but I was influenced by young people, how open they were and how independent-minded they were. And I always kid, because there's probably somebody here that belongs to the Chamber of Commerce. I said, I didn't do as well with the Chamber of Commerce as I did with young college kids, even in the liberal universities, because I think I'm so fully convinced that the message of liberty is so fantastic that it's a shame that we don't do a better job. And this is something that came out of my interest in monetary policy, because I introduced a bill for competing currencies, get rid of this total monopoly of the Fed printing money.
Well, of course, when you started, there was no Bitcoin. You were simply concerned about the Federal Reserve and U.S. monetary policy. For the folks at home who maybe support President Trump or another candidate listening for the first time, what can you share about your work really lobbying against the Federal Reserve?
Well, it really started early on, because probably the first year, matter of fact, the first campaign I was in, it was in 1974, and was tokenism. But I know I went back and found the literature. I said, there's something wrong with the monetary system. We should sound money, and we should look into this Federal Reserve. And I was in favor very early on. To do one thing was to audit the Fed, to expose to the people how terrible it is, and how they gain this monopoly power, and also to know how secretly it was done. So I was looking for openness, and there was a bill passed in the early 80s, or I think maybe 70s, that was called the Bank Secrecy Act. And I thought, well, that's good. I'm for bank secrecy. But it turned out it was secrecy for the government in order to look at all our bank accounts. So I was looking for something, where the people have their privacy. So privacy has been a big issue in what I've done and did in Congress, to emphasize the need, because privacy, at times they talk about it, but that's what liberty is all about. Privacy. You're an individual. You can do what you want with your money. When I talk about income tax, why is it that the government gets all your money and they allow you to spend a certain portion of it? So that's all the principle of liberty. So I think this movement, which there's too much credit given to me that I had anything to do with it. But what I say is, I talked about the problems that we have, and how the principles of liberty solve our problems, and I believe in competing currencies and rein in the Fed's monopoly. And all of a sudden, somebody interpreted that. Maybe I didn't, so I didn't think this up, but it's what I love about it. It's a consequence of people concentrating on the principles of liberty, and because I so strongly believe in it, and I just think that we need a better effort. I work every single day to try to present the case for liberty so that people, the average people, just wake up. And so evidently, if people in this audience,
they're waking up, they're awake, and they're in line here, waiting to see Donald J. Trump. He's sitting here with the great Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, would love to get your thoughts on the issues facing Americans and the economy today. Obviously, in election 2024, the economy is going to be a huge issue. What are your thoughts on just the current state of inflation and savings for the average person?
I think we live witnessing now the cracking of the biggest bubble ever in the history of financial history. And that it's been created by the number one cause, of course, is the inflation of the money supply and the devaluing of the currency. But I date so much with August 15th of 71 because that took and severed the last link to something with a definition. And I think you have to have
talking about the Nixon shock.
Yeah, when they closed that, I think you have to have a unit of account, morally and financially. But if you have no account, and that's what the debate and the arguments going on now. Can and will a Bitcoin be a unit of account? But I don't think there's a magic wand. I think it takes time to people understand that so that they measure things. Today, still, the majority of people still measure the unit of account as $1, and that's why the bubble keeps being bigger. But it's going to change. The bubble always ends, and it ends either by the government wising up, which they never do, and spend less money and quit printing money.
Is there a solution to the debt crisis that you see right now if you were in power?
Not under these conditions, but there is a solution. It can be found, in freedom. So you have to realize that the government can't. They created this problem. So, but it's going to be very hard because it's very painful to quit spending. I mean, too many special interest groups. It's a ton of them, rich and poor and everybody. And then you have the military-industrial complex. You have domestic spending. You have foreign policy spending, and but unfortunately, it's not just been one party. It's been both parties that spend. And so I'm very independent-minded very often on, blaming he did this and he did that, because to get elected, so the people have responsibility too. But I think that's where the waking up is going. People are starting to wake up. And I thought there was an awakening with COVID.
Right.
When the people finally said, "What's up? What are you doing this to me for?" And the whole thing is people waking up. The government took over the medical care system and gave all those directions. They were tyrants. They didn't allow us to make the medical decisions, and they controlled. They did this in education. Right. So it's the taking over the monetary policy. The symbolic date or the real date I pin it down is that August 15th, when there was going to be no restraint on the Federal Reserve, no restraint on the special interests, no restraint whatsoever. So this is the reason why we have so much special interest and so many lobbyists in Washington, and they really run the show.
Well, Dr. Paul, I want to get your thoughts today. We're minutes away from Donald J. Trump's historic speech at the Bitcoin conference. I want to talk a little bit about your Bitcoin journey. Maybe you can tell us how your thoughts on Bitcoin have evolved in 2012 when you were running for president. A lot of young, enthusiastic kids coming to you with this maybe crazy idea.
Well, I have to say, I see it through my personal viewpoint, and that is, we already touched on this, if you take the principles of liberty, the people solve these problems. I didn't stay up and say, I understand inflation and we have to solve this problem. I think I'm going to invent the Bitcoin or something like that. But no,
so
you have to have freedom of choice. You have to have freedom of choice. So that's important. Otherwise, the ideas can't develop. So I have a lot of confidence in people who are allowed to make up their own mind, recognize that they own their lives, they ought to own their own money, and there's one strict rule of this almost total freedom is you can't use violence and you can't defraud, because if you break the rules of natural law, it's not going to work out. And that's a contest that's been going on for thousands of years, the good and the bad and the natural law. But we're up against right now in this country groups of people that said, you guys, you believe in this truth thing. You're always seeking truth. What is right and wrong? And they actually have a philosophy. Marxism is based on this. They don't have it. Don't waste your time trying to find out what truth is, because there is no truth. So what does that do? Opens up the door to tyranny. You know, that's what they do. It's an open up to force, and that's where we are. And then the bubbles, and I see it as a moral bankruptcy and a financial bankruptcy, and it does end, and it is ending. This bubble's going to burst. The biggest question is, how are they going to survive? How will we survive? And that is what we don't know. If it isn't connected with maximizing and the understanding of liberty, it's not going to work. And so sometimes this has gone through history at times, and sometimes that we'll end up getting a worse government. So if things don't come along where they decide that the principles of limited government and personal freedom, if that's not acceptable, we're all going to suffer more. We see some of the results, in our cities now, with more homeless people and all this. That's the payment that is coming back. But I also I'm really an optimist on this, because I do believe when I see a crowd like this, that if you're indicating the possibility that some of them came because they heard the principles of liberty, that would excite me. And I think there are people that get excited about liberty. And at one time somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you're a politician that wants to legalize marijuana." And I pretended I was very resentful about it. I said, no, you have it wrong. I never said legalize marijuana. I said legalize freedom of choice.
We're with the great Dr. Ron Paul here. Ron, want to get your sentiments, your idea. Oh, applause. Wild here for Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, is there a candidate that can go far enough to solve some of these issues facing America? Is there a candidate in this election that has impressed you?
Oh, yeah, about 10. Well, I don't get into the personalities. I think we get lost sometimes at one time, because I was never a person in politics. I was a person that was enthusiastic, that I wanted to speak out, and that was a vehicle. So I don't deal with parties, but I go out and see people and talk to people, and I've met Trump, and the one thing about Trump, and this may be talking out of school, and he might say, you shouldn't be talking about our conversation, that his personality was different. He was much more cordial than I ever believed.
Well, people in person, they make a different impression.
No, it was different. Some people would interpret his personality differently, but I really try to avoid it. If anybody wants to talk about freedom, and I can have an influence, then I'm interested.
Well, we're here with Dr. Ron Paul. We're going to send it over to the main stage. Of course, his legacy lives on in the conversations here at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee, minutes away from Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States, taking the stage. We'll be right back with fast reactions of what happens on stage here at the Mara News Desk. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for joining us, and another round of applause from everyone. It was great.
Good to see everybody.